I am the Wizard Master, and in my dreams, I can walk. A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors stars Heather Langenkamp, Robert Englund, and is directed by Chuck Russell. So the first Nightmare comes out, huge hit. Then the second comes out, confuses the hell out of a lot of people. So then they start wondering, where the hell is this franchise going to go after this? And did they think that the next sequel in the Nightmare franchise was going to be pretty much the Terminator 2 of A Nightmare on Elm Street? A Nightmare on Elm Street, The Dream Warriors, is really just a massive movie. And who would have thought that all these things could come together to create this huge, great story, put together all these characters, new characters and the characters from the first movie, and then end up becoming one of the biggest hits of 1987. Let's talk about this movie. So after Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, they knew they were going to make another one because it was still a hit. It was not a huge hit like the first one, but it still made a lot of money. And what's great about the Nightmare series is really you can go anywhere with this story. I mean, a lot of it takes place in the dreams, and there's so many different angles that you can play with that Freddy character. So every time you have a new Nightmare movie, you really don't know what you're going to get. And that was the case with Part 3. You know, the producers, they went to all these different writers. Wes Craven himself even had a hand in some of the writing. And the meat and potatoes of the plot of this movie was written by Frank Darabont, who directed The Shawshank Redemption, among other writers. Guys, this might be a long review. There's so much I can talk about with the Dream Warriors. First, let's just get into the plot. The story of the Dream Warriors is you got this group of kids. They are the Elm Street children, and they are all mental patients. And the big thing is they don't want to go to sleep. So they're on all these medications. They're having these group therapies. And Freddy is pretty much torturing these guys, picking them off one by one. And nobody will listen to them. And one of the main characters of this movie is Neil, played by Craig Wasson. He's one of the doctors in the mental ward. And he starts having his suspicions because all these kids are having the same stories and they're all matching up. So he's wondering, maybe there's something more to this. And then Nancy, Heather Langenkamp from the first movie, enters the fold. She opens his mind to what these kids are going through, and she shares with him what she went through back from the first Nightmare. And in the end, Nancy teams up with all these children, and they really become the Avengers of the Nightmare world, and they all take on Freddy. And guys, right out the gate, I'm going to say this is one of the best Nightmare on Elm Street movies. And most people will agree with me on this. This is just such a fun movie. It's a smorgasbord. It's really like a perfect storm for a horror movie. And I will say this is one of the best horror movies of the 80s. It's really that good. First off, what I love about the Dream Warriors is it is such an interesting story. It is so interesting to see these kids, who are all great actors, by the way, and they're all just dealing with this nightmare of Freddy all in different ways, and they help each other out. You know, they take watch and try to stay up, and they wake each other up, and you are rooting for them throughout the whole thing. By the end of this movie, you are just fully invested in these characters and their journey, and you want them to make it out of this. Also, it was just so great to see some original cast members returning, especially Nancy, Heather Langenkamp, and her father, John Saxon. You know, they really added some much needed gravitas to this movie. And one scene that I really love is when Nancy falls asleep and she enters the dream world with Kristen, played by Patricia Arquette. And then Freddy comes into this dream, and then when he first notices Nancy and he says, "You." I remember seeing that movie in the theater. By the way, this is the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie I saw in the theater. But that scene was just so cool. You could just feel a chill going through the audience. And this just really reminded me of how awesome a final girl Nancy is. You really feel like she could take on Freddy. She could kick his ass because she really is just a smart character. She has her wits about her. And I'll even say she's probably one of the most underrated final girls out there. Also really liked Patricia Arquette in this movie as Kristen. She has a really cool power. She's able to pull other people into her dreams in order to help her take on Freddy. But this was her first movie, and I gotta say, for a first movie, I thought she did a great job. And when I saw this movie, I was just a young teenage male, so when I saw the scene with Joey and the nurse, you can imagine my excitement, and every other teenage boy's excitement at that time. But I really just love all these kids and all the different powers that they had, and it just really kept the story interesting all the way through. Even when Freddy himself wasn't in the movie, you were still fully interested. Okay, now let's talk about Freddy for a bit. Freddy was great in this, but this was really the turning point. This was where Freddy became comical.
This is it, Jennifer. Your big break in TV. Welcome to prime time, bitch.
Like really comical. If you remember, he had a really, really dark side in the first two movies. And in this movie, he still had a little bit of a dark side. He was just sinister enough, but he started cracking a lot of jokes. But this really had that perfect happy medium. Like, he wasn't annoying yet. He does get annoying in some of the later movies, in my opinion. But I thought this had that perfect balance of the comical Freddy and the evil Freddy. But don't get me wrong, Robert Englund was just great in this movie. He was really at the top of his Freddy game in Dream Warriors. And finally, the last thing I love so much about this movie is the third act. You know, this isn't just a movie where you got a killer picking off people one by one and then final girl takes out the guy at the end. No, this has a really cool, complex third act where all these different pieces have to come together to take out Freddy in the end. And if you haven't seen this movie, I'm not going to spoil it. But I just thought it was very well done in the end. Now, there are very few cons that I can think of. If I got to name a con for this movie, I'm going to nitpick a little bit and maybe say the Wizard Master. He was a little too Dungeons and Dragons for me, but he doesn't really take away from your enjoyment of the movie. So for that, I'm definitely going to give Dream Warriors a high purchase worthy. It's really, really close to Trapped on an Island, and it's easily one of the best Nightmare on Elm Street movies. Probably one of the best out of all three horror icons. It's a great, great movie. And while I'm talking about horror icons, I'm going to post a link to one of the episodes of Horror Needs a Hero that CP and I did called Best of the Big Three, where we talk about Freddy, Michael, and Jason. And there is some discussion on Dream Warriors in that little documentary. So definitely check that out. So anyway, guys, what are your thoughts on the Dream Warriors? I know a lot of people love this movie. If you didn't like this movie, let me know why. Also, be sure to check out my playlist for all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies that I'm doing. And also go ahead and check out my horror playlist. I have tons of horror reviews that I would love for you guys to check out. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to my channel, follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and Humdrum out.